Hello, everyone. Welcome to the SavvyCast. This is Jamie, and I'm delighted that you're here today, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to the podcast. Are you and your family medically prepared? That's the topic we're going to dive into today, and I think it's one that can prove very, very helpful and practical to all of us. So I'm really excited to welcome to the SavvyCast Dr. Shawn Rowland. He is the MD, founder, and CEO of Jase Medical. He is a board-certified family medicine physician who has trained at academic institutions and community hospitals around the country. He has also had experience working on our southern border during COVID, which ultimately led to his formation of Jase Medical. And Jase Medical is a means of furthering his mission to empower everyone to be better prepared medically. When not working in this capacity, Dr. Rowland, his wife, and 4 daughters enjoy hiking and skiing in the mountains of northern Utah, where they reside. Dr. Rowland's undergraduate degree is from the University of Utah, and his medical degrees are from the University of Guadalajara and New York Medical College, and his specialty is family medicine. So I would love to welcome to the SavvyCast Dr. Shawn Rowland. Dr. Rowland, thank you so much for being on the SavvyCast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Really excited to be here.
Well, I am very excited, and I feel like this is going to be a content-rich, very practical and helpful episode to everyone. But first, before we start, I would love to know what you would choose as your last meal.
Last meal. Let me think. I'm a meat eater.
Yeah.
I guess first and foremost. So that kind of jumps immediately to mind. I spent probably too much money. My wife certainly would agree that we've got too many appliances outside, whether it's a smoker, a searer, all kinds of grills to make that perfect steak. So I pride myself on a good steak. So I'd probably have to make it myself if I was making my last meal. And it would be a steak. But lately I've been on this sushi poke kick. Love a good tuna poke bowl. So that might be another one on there.
That's awesome. Well, Dr. Rowland, I would like for you to first just tell a little bit about your family. You are a girl dad. My husband and I have 3 daughters, so we have an idea of what life is like with all girls. So just tell us a little bit about you personally and your family.
Love to. I always love to meet other girl dads and moms just because we're looking for all the help we can get. Ours are pretty young still. We've got 4 little girls from the ages of 5 up to 11.
Oh, wow.
So they're all still, we haven't just been warned, right, about this. My 11-year-old, I guess, is really close, but when I get a house full of teenage girls, I might need to move out. We'll see. But they're awesome. We love them. And my wife is just busy taking care of them and being an awesome mom, making sure that they're going to their activities and all the school stuff. And so she stays really busy. I myself, I'm a family medicine physician, board certified. We've lived kind of all over the country, even out of the country. We've spent time in Mexico, New Mexico, New York, Connecticut. I did some rotations in Ohio, but most of my training was in Utah, which is where we reside currently.
Well, I would like to tell everyone how I discovered you and why I invited you to be on the SavvyCast. I caught the tail end, probably 2 minutes max, of your interview with Glenn Beck. Had you on his program, and I listened to it this week, but I'm not sure when you recorded it. But I was so intrigued, and I was also a little fearful because the things you were talking about, I thought, you know what, I'm not up to par and being medically prepared. So I was so grateful that when my podcast coordinator reached out to you, you were so gracious to accept, to share all of these things with my people. talk to us about, first of all, you have an extensive medical background working with all types of people. And I saw that you were on the southern border during COVID, and that had a lot to do with your starting Jase Medical, which we'll get into. But what did you see there, and how did you, first of all, happen to be in that place during COVID?
Yeah, so I was at a community hospital in New Mexico, and actually doing some training there. It was pre-COVID, and then kind of right at the height of COVID is when we moved back to Utah. And I started a private practice in Utah. But certainly on the border there, I mean, we were involved in border health with a lot of the migrants coming across the border who needed medical attention. So a lot of humanitarian work in that regard. But then just living and working on a border town, had some unique experiences where you might see people who just really have not had access to healthcare for some time, and that presents its unique challenges. And then, of course, and we'll probably get into it, but the shortages that not just, I have to say, this wasn't unique to being on the border in one of these hospitals. The shortages we were experienced across the nation to one degree or another.
Yes, and that is what I think most of us are concerned about, because we did see those shortages during COVID, and those with chronic conditions, it can be a life or death situation. And you created Jase Medical to help those people who think ahead be able to be prepared. So tell us what Jase Medical is all about.
Absolutely. Yeah. The quick one-liner, our mission is to empower everyone to be better prepared medically. And that's a big mission, being prepared medically. It's so individualized for each person. There's a lot of pieces there, and a lot of things that currently are kind of outside my control and maybe I'll just get into kind of how we got here, and some of those things will be more clear. Back in New Mexico, around 2017, 2018, things were going well. The pandemic wasn't on anyone's radar.
Mm-hmm.
Economy was doing well, and we were just used to our lifestyle here in the United States of being able to get what we wanted when we wanted it. At that time, in the hospital, we started to have shortages of certain IV antibiotics and some other really kind of crucial and vital tools that we use as physicians to care for patients. And so that was the first, just kind of a little alarm bells going off. Well, that's interesting, and maybe it was a fluke. But then it just kind of carried on, and it was always something else. It was an antibiotic, it was saline solution, there was always something where the pharmacist would say, hey, either we don't have it, or we're in such short supply that you have to go through a special approval process to even be able to use it. And because it kept going on, there's something else going on here. And, in the medical community, as a physician, we don't get trained in where the medications come from, and we hardly get any kind of training in what the medications cost, let alone their true cost. And so I just started doing my own digging through a lot of research, and basically came to find out, which is this little known fact that we talked about on Glenn Beck's show. It was around 2004 when the last generic antibiotic, my understanding is this plant in 2004, it's a Bristol Myers plant, was making penicillin in some form or another. And they shut down. And that was kind of the last plant in the US that still had any kind of production capacity for a generic antibiotic. Everything had been and continues to be produced now overseas. So now, here in the US.
May I ask you a question on that?
Yeah.
That was the Bristol Myers, that plant was the last one in the US that was producing generic antibiotics. Would that
Correct.
be something like doxycycline? Is that a generic?
Yeah. So
which is very widely used.
Yeah. So let's take a step back and talk about generics. In the United States, over 90%, probably around 95% of what's prescribed and consumed on a daily basis is a generic medication. These are just medications that have been out for long enough that whoever developed them initially no longer has their patent, and anyone can make them. And so they're a lot cheaper. Chemically, they're identical to the brand name medications. But the truth is, even with some of these, they've been out for so long that the brand name it's not even really available anymore, because you've got an alternative that's much cheaper. It's the same thing. And so the generics account for really the vast majority of what's consumed in the US. So 95% on a daily basis is a generic medication. And that could be, it could be the statin you're taking. It could be the thyroid medication you're taking, blood pressure medication. And then you mentioned doxycycline, which is an antibiotic. So yes, that is one of the generic medications. Any penicillin, Z-Paks, all this stuff is generic, and it all comes from outside the US. So when I say that number of about 95% is consumed as generic, of that number, virtually 100% of it is made outside the US. Now, right as of today. And that number was about 50%, just as short as it was around 2015, if I'm remembering these numbers off the top of my head, but around 2015, that's that 100% number that I'm saying is 100% now outside the US was more like 50%. And it's really now we're just completely dependent in a relatively short period of time on the foreign production of all these life-saving and vital medications.
Do you know what happened?
Money, follow the money. China, this gets really hard to connect these dots, but they have been connected by people. And I'll mention a book. It's called China RX. It's written by Rosemary Gibson. She's done some amazing work to really try and penetrate the veil when it comes to the pharmaceutical production in the world. And gosh, to contrast that with the FDA, for example, a couple of months ago, there was a Senate hearing talking about this, what is a national security concern when it comes to our dependence on overseas productions for pharmaceuticals. And so there was a Senate hearing. She and some others were quoted in that hearing, but things came out to light. The fact that the FDA has a hard time and has worked really hard and is still unable as of today to basically source all the components that come into your medication. So the active pharmaceutical ingredient, the fillers, all the different parts of this production process, and then they're ultimately put together into its final form. Having like a chain of where all this came from and make sure it's all safe and vetted. Even the FDA is not equipped as of today to do that. Basically, all these generic medications produced overseas, the why, really at the end of the day, it comes down to money. And I think some concerted efforts by places like China, where they basically came into certain markets, were able to subsidize, probably get government-backed entities could come in, artificially lower the prices, drive everybody out of the market, and then basically take over the market, bring the prices back up. And there's an example of them doing that time and again. Now there they are, they're sitting with basically where even if the medications are being produced outside of China, let's say like in India, for example, India is a big producer of generic medications for the United States. But even India gets about 70% of their active ingredients are coming from China. And so even though, you've got India, you've got China, you've got Europe, Israel, but all roads in one form or another seem to China has their fingerprint on it one way or another. Anytime you've got that kind of a consolidation for anything when it comes to manufacturing, you're just kind of ripe for disruption. It could be a local problem at the factory that's where it's produced, some local natural disaster. It could be something that happens in transit between here and there. There's just so many potential things. We saw it here last summer. We had one factory shut down. This was a domestic. So our baby formula is what I'm talking about. Baby formula in the United States. The FDA has mandated prior to this issue, everything had to be produced domestically. We didn't allow any importing of baby formula. And so you're thinking, okay, we're safe. It's here. It's domestically produced. Well, one factory had an issue in Michigan, and everyone lived through the results, right? It was 40+% of our supply was immediately gone. And it just has this chain reaction that occurs to where now you're a mom and you're frantically trying to figure out how you're going to feed your baby. Imagine that, but now we're doing it on a global scale because these global producers of medications, we're just one country of the entire world that depends on the same factory. And imagine all the different links in the chain between something foreign produced getting to here to us domestically. What it means is that it has happened. We have seen disruptions. We will continue to see them. And in my opinion, they're just going to get worse. And so the US, to our government's credit, it's starting to kind of be talked about and be noticed and say, hey, how can we fix this? Can we bring production back to the US? What does that take? The answer is it takes a lot of time. It's not something we can do quickly, and it takes a lot of money. And so in the meantime, here I am. I'm a family medicine physician. I'm concerned for my own family's well-being. We're in the height of the pandemic. And I'm sitting here saying, man, we can't even leave our homes. We can't get toilet paper. There's all these things we're living through. So that's where I said, okay, I want to make sure my family's protected. And so I did that as far as, and I'm speaking specifically about, medications and having the things we needed. And then I immediately had this guilty feeling of, well, cool, that's great for my family. What about my parents? What about my best friends? What about my neighbors? What about my community at large? And that's where Jace came from. How can I do this as a physician? Can I do it in a way that's going to be safe, that's going to be appropriate, while at the same time empowering my patients to have that same level of medical preparedness and to try and do something to protect themselves from these disruptions. And I focus on supply chain because that was really the impetus behind all this. But since then, we've already seen with our patients through the service, people who've been through the horrible blizzards that were up in the north, in the Northeast this last winter, couldn't get out of their homes for days, a week at a time. There's just so many of those situations where having access to basic vital antibiotics and other medications is really important.
It's frightening, but it's also very motivating to learn about how to be medically prepared. So you saw this and you got a handful of the people that you work with, and y'all are providing medications in advance. Is that basically what you would say you're doing? How does it work?
So that mission, be better prepared medically, like I mentioned, it's a big ask. It's specific to the individual. We chose to start with antibiotics because that's something that really is universal. You might not have a heart condition, you might not have high cholesterol, but everyone at one time or another, there's a high likelihood that you either have or will need access to an antibiotic, whether it's for a sinus infection, pneumonia, urinary tract infection, animal bite, whatever it is. So that was a way that we could, hey, this is just a good first step. It's relatively uncomplicated. We specifically chose, there's 5 antibiotics. So you asked how do you do this? You go to our website, jasemedical.com, Jace with an S. And on that, you'll get to choose, are you looking for antibiotics? Are you looking for something for a chronic condition? We'll go with the antibiotics first. So you go into the antibiotic encounter. And what I'm after as a physician is, what do I need to know in order to provide these medications to you safely? I need to know what medications you're taking to make sure there's no interactions. I need to know if you're allergic to any of these medications. And then I also want to know, because I want to make sure that if you tell me I'm not allergic and you tell me that your kidneys work and your liver work, you actually know that because you've spoken to a physician at some point recently. So the other piece of this is I want to know that you've got a doctor, that you've seen them recently. And so then I have confidence that, okay, I know you're not allergic. I know there's no interactions with your meds. I know you have a regular doctor who you can contact for any needs and questions, or if your health changes. And then we also ask that you let us know if there's any changes. So it's a relatively simple, I would say, simple process in that you're not telling me about your cancer history and about your surgeries and whether your mom has breast cancer, and I don't need to know some of those things. So it's focused. So you go to the website, you fill out that form, and then that goes to one of our physicians, and they review it. They contact you with any questions. Some states require that they have call it more direct encounter. So that process takes place, and you don't have to make an appointment. It's part of the service. If for some reason they deny you, or they feel like you're not an appropriate candidate, which can happen, we pay for that. We pay for that out of our pocket. We'll pay the physician to make that determination. So you're not on the hook for any of that. But assuming everything goes through and everything's good, they send that prescription to one of our partner pharmacies, who we've worked really hard to negotiate on some volume pricing so that these are accessible to as many people as we can get them to. And so one of those partner pharmacies will fill the med, they'll package it up, and they'll send it to your door. The whole process, and when things go, perfectly smooth, might take you 10 minutes to fill that form out. And then hopefully in a couple of days, you've got those medications on your doorstep. That's for the antibiotics, and the chronic medications is a little different.
Can I ask you what month supply is the Jace, or let's say the antibiotics, since we're on that?
Yeah. So we call the antibiotics the Jace case. It's a case of 5 antibiotics. It comes with the antibiotics. It comes with a book that explains. So if you can't talk to your doctor, you can't get a hold of a medical professional, you're out in the middle of nowhere, a country where no one speaks your language, there's a book written in layman's terms to say, okay, here's your symptoms. Well, in your kit, you've got this med. Here's how to take it for how long. That's also part of the kit. And then you get ongoing support from us, where if you do have questions, you can always email and talk to a physician or one of us. As far as the amounts, time-wise, you asked, the 5 antibiotics are enough to cover really any, so it's one kit per person, because it has to be prescribed to you as an individual. So each of those meds is prescribed to you. You would be hard pressed to need all those meds in a year period. What we did intentionally was we wanted to cover different things for different illnesses, not knowing which one might come up. You've got enough to cover a wide range of different bacterial illnesses. You could cover, let's say you had a UTI during the year, you had a pneumonia during the year, and you got bit by something. You'd have enough to cover all those different eventualities. There's one particular unique aspect to our kit that you'll see, and that is that we also purposely chose the drugs and the amounts in order to cover for bioterror. So in the realm of preparedness, we want to try and cover for every eventuality. So bioterror is one that the government has identified certain agents. There's 3 of them: anthrax, plague, and tularemia. Those are all treatable or in some cases preventable with the proper antibiotic. So if there was a bioterror attack in your town, you would have about 24-ish hours to get on one of these antibiotics to keep from getting sick. So that's also part of our kit. So there's enough in there to really cover for, I can't say any eventuality, but certainly the most common and the most deadly.
Okay. Wow. And I get frequent UTIs. If someone gets those and they respond better to a particular drug, do you ever say, hey, we'll substitute?
Yeah. Right now, no. And that's just because of the way the system's built. And in order to be able to help as many people as we can, we will swap out medications, obviously, for allergies, if you can't tolerate a certain med. But again, because of the prearranged pricing and the volume that in order to get that pricing, it's not quite the same as being able to say, well, this med works better for me, so let's build this. Sure. So we are getting there.
Can you tell us what the 5 antibiotics are?
Yeah. So Augmentin is the brand name of amoxicillin clavulanate. That's kind of a broad spectrum penicillin-based antibiotic. It's great for sinusitis. It's partially for some community-acquired pneumonia. Then there's also, let me go through alphabetically here, azithromycin. So that's a Z-Pak. Everyone's heard of the Z-Pak. Then you've got ciprofloxacin. That's a fluoroquinolone that is good for UTIs, prostatitis. There's a number of things that ciprofloxacin works for. It's also one of those bioterror medications. And then there is, after that, doxycycline you mentioned. And doxycycline is a great, really broad spectrum. Can cover pneumonia, can cover bites, skin infections, covers anthrax and plague. So doxycycline's in there, and there's quite a bit of it because that's the one that we selected as kind of the go-to for that bioterror. So there's enough. You have to take that medication for 2 months if you're ever exposed to one of those agents. And so there's enough to take that medication for 2 months. And then lastly is technically not an antibiotic. It's called Flagyl is the brand name. It's metronidazole. That's kind of intra-abdominal infections. If it also treats giardia, kind of anti-protozoal. So those are the 5.
Okay. So if which I plan to probably today to order my Jase case, but I order my Jase case, then my husband and every member of the family. So a Jase case, you may not use any of them, but if you're going to need them, especially for something like bioterror or 2 people get sick, you need to have one for every person.
Exactly. Yep. That's exactly right. And we should probably mention, yes, we hope you never need to use it. Yeah. That's the hope. And so everyone always asks, well, how long is it good for? How long can I store it? And the answer to that is, so the pharmacist, whenever they dispense medication, most state boards of pharmacy have a requirement that expiration date be printed on the bottle, and it's a year from the time it was dispensed. Whenever you get it, it'll typically be a year from that day. And that's the official expiration date. We encourage people to go and do some research. The FDA has done and has an ongoing study. It's called the Shelf Life Extension Program. It was a commission study that the DoD asked the FDA to do on their behalf. The United States maintains really big stockpiles of vast stockpiles of medications. And in this case, we're talking specifically antibiotics. And they were having to turn this stuff over every few years, and it was costing a lot of money. So they wanted to know, are these really expired? And so they commissioned this study. It's been going on for a number of years now. And what they found was that if they're stored properly, and that means they're kept dry and cool, that these medications at a minimum retain their viability for a minimum. That average was 5 years, with some of them going as long as 15 plus years. Good to know if you're one of those
people. It's wise, really. Don't throw away your medication. Maybe put some of the older aside if.
And and I have to, as a physician, in good conscience, I can't just say,
right.
There's nuance to this, and the reason that you'll see, yes, you need to throw them away when they're expired, is because some medications do degrade into toxic substances. There are some antibiotics that if you take them beyond their printed expiration date, it can do bad damage to your kidneys and other things. So yes, so you need to know exactly whether the meds I'm storing are these ones that aren't going to degrade into toxic substances. Turns out the five antibiotics in our kit are on the safe list. At worst, what you'll get is they might become less potent. So maybe they're 90% potent instead of 100%, but they won't degrade into a toxic substance.
Okay. Well, the Jace case. Okay, so that's wonderful. What about medicines for chronic conditions, diabetes? I have a thyroid condition. Those medications that people need every day. How do you help with that?
So that was what brought us on Glenn Beck's program. It's something that we've been working a long time on. It's a different animal when you've got 5 medications. They're the same medications. You might substitute 1 or 2 for everybody, to now opening up to hundreds of medications, a lot of different conditions. Not all of them are appropriate to have an extended supply of. Some conditions require more regular monitoring, and medications that require monitoring. So building all that out and doing it in a way that was safe and appropriate, that is our Jace Daily, is what we call that service. And that's for people who take a medication every day for their thyroid, for their diabetes, for their cholesterol, blood pressure, seizure disorders, depression, anxiety. Anything that has been identified where that medication doesn't require really close monitoring for blood levels and therapeutic effects. But it does come with some other, caveats in that I definitely need to know that you have seen your physician recently, with as recent as 6 months. I need to know that you haven't been in the hospital. And if you have been in the hospital, why? Because that's going to affect the appropriateness. So there are a few extra steps, in that process. And then sometimes it's just not appropriate. We do not deal with any controlled substances. So pain medications for things like ADHD, hormone replacement are not on the list. Right now, we're limited to pills, oral stuff only. So topical medications and injectables are also not on the list. It's our first step kind of into that chronic condition realm. Right now, you can go to the website and go through the process. And we're asking for basically from the public 2 things. One is your patience in the process, but 2 is to help us. If there's a medication that you go, it's not on our list, let us know. There's a way on the form to let us know. You can also email us so that we can evaluate it, go to our physicians, evaluate it, and get it added if it's appropriate, as this is a new thing. So we're kind of growing together here, but we've had a great response.
What would y'all do if on your end, let's say, unfortunately, something happened on a global scale? But for those who don't have a Jace case and they're immediately trying to get one, do you halt like everything else, or?
Right now, so we try and stay abreast of the FDA maintains a list, and there's also a university-backed entity that tries to monitor and anticipate shortages when it comes to pharmaceuticals. So through our direct efforts, and then also through our pharmacy partners, we try and really stay abreast of that. We had a good example. Ciprofloxacin was a national shortage last summer, where it was wherever you were, certainly in the hospitals, they were having a hard time getting this medication. And so in anticipation of that and hearing about it, we tried to get some more on hand, and you don't get a lot of time. Maybe you get a week or so of notice. But to your question about if there was a major disruption, the unfortunate fact is that we and everybody in the world we're all going to the same group of wholesalers and dealing, who then thereby deal directly with the manufacturers. Where we go is the same place as Walmart's going, for example. So if or when that disruption happens, we're all in the same unlucky boat. We will be too. And that gets to some bigger, that's where, I said, I'd love to bring production back to the US. I'd love to have a direct relationship with manufacturers that we can better prepare and be better prepared for these things. But as it stands, as of today, no, we're in the same line. And not just here in the US, this is global. Insulin, Novo Nordisk is in Denmark. There's a plant in Denmark that makes half of the global supply of insulin, one factory. It's just, it's how this is, and diabetics, and I've talked to a lot of them, they live, that's something that they live with. They dealt with it, and certainly over COVID, it was a big deal too. Not just the cost, but just access. And cost is an issue as well. But these are big issues. We're trying to do what we can in our little corner.
Who is helping you the most up on the Hill? I'm sure this originates on the Hill. Who needs the pressure applied? Is it congressmen or senators?
Well, it's both.
And are they not concerned? Because
there are some that are concerned. I mean, and they had that Senate hearing tackling this. It's a really big problem to tackle. And what it will take is, and I alluded to it before, just if you're talking about antibiotics, for example, antibiotics go through, the production process involves fermentation, and there's a lot of time involved and a lot of steps. So if you were to try to get up and running with your own production, it's going to take years to build the facility, to generate those kind of precursor ingredients. It takes years, let alone the cost that's associated with it. And because we're talking about generics, there just isn't money. And that gets back to how did we lose them to begin with? We were dealing with razor thin margins. There's just really not much money to be made in the generic market. So this would have to be something that was subsidized by the US government as kind of a national security concern, and thereby justified to be a subsidized market. I don't see another way that happens. And so just talking about these things, you've got so many players involved and so many interested parties. And with how things go, just for less complicated things in our current political climate, I'm not super hopeful that we're going to see anything anytime soon.
Wow. Dr. Rowland, is there anything that you feel compelled to share that might be advantageous for those of us as parents? What would you say to parents just who want to be medically prepared for their kids?
Yes, thank you for that opportunity. I haven't been asked this question before, and I feel passionate about this. I have to be careful to not let my emotions get the better of me when it comes to thinking about my role as a father and also as a physician. I'll tell you a little anecdotal story. One of the things that I want to get across is this is a piece of your preparedness. This is while it's a big important piece, it's not the end all be all. But it is something. It's unique. You're not going to find it anywhere else, and it's really important. But I want people to understand that there's still more that they should be doing. With that said, the anecdotal story. So this last winter, one of our little girls has asthma. You can imagine, like her family medicine doctor dad, who we've had times in the past where we were out traveling or something and we didn't have quick access to get her what she needed. And so my determination was to have everything on hand so that I could avoid having to take her to the hospital until we absolutely had to. And so I had everything, right? I've got everything she needs. She got an asthma exacerbation. We're going to be prepared. Just so happened that this particular day, I was short one piece of equipment. She was having an exacerbation. They don't happen very often. She gets maybe one a year at most. And I was getting concerned. She needed to go to the hospital. So get her in the car. We rushed to the hospital. And the hospital at this time, this was kind of just as RSV was really taking off, and we're at a children's hospital where they're just really, really busy, and for whatever reason, something got lost in translation. They didn't understand the urgency of the situation. They didn't understand that she's turning blue. She needs help now. I can't wait for your triage to come through. But we sat there for almost 10 minutes, which doesn't sound like a long time, but when you can't breathe, it's an eternity. And as a father, and I just remember sitting there and the feeling of being so dependent on a system that wasn't able to help me at that moment. I will say, ultimately, when they realized what was going on, took action, and things turned out fine. But just the lesson learned was that feeling of, and I promised myself, like, I will do anything I can to not be in this position where I feel completely powerless to help my child, because there's not a worse feeling. And the reason I started my comment with this isn't the end all be all, because there's more to do. But I would say, and that's kind of that final message, as you asked, is as a mother, as a father, as anyone who's taking care of anyone else, and even just who's taking care of yourself, this is something that everyone should take serious. It's something that we've tried to make as easy as possible so that you don't have to make an appointment, wait 3 weeks to go see your doc, explain what you're trying to do, pay all this money out of pocket because insurance won't accept it. And at the end of the day, no one's going to do it because, well, if or when that ever happens, I'll figure it out. We tried to make it so that it's easy. You do it from the comfort of your home. It takes a few minutes, and you've at least got one more piece of armor that you can depend on. Having been there myself, having had countless stories from patients who thank us after availing themselves of the service and then having something happen where they had to use it. I feel so strongly about it. And it's something that I thank you for the opportunity to get the word out, because that's what we're trying to do. People just don't understand. They didn't know where their meds came from. They didn't know that if there was an issue, that 2 weeks later, their pharmacy shelves would be bare. They didn't know that it was actually really cost effective and not super expensive. They didn't know how easy and convenient it was. And so because we're new and we're out here doing this and trying to educate people, yeah, it's just a matter of people understanding and taking the time to listen, and people like yourselves who say, hey, this is important and I have a platform, and so I want to help spread the word.
Well, before I let you sign off, I know you're super busy. You have made an offer for all those who find out about Jase Medical through this, a discount, and the prices, I must say, are astoundingly reasonable.
Yeah,
I don't know why everyone wouldn't be giving these away as gifts. I mean, honestly, now I'm just, as a lifestyle influencer who does gift guides, this would be a wonderful thing to give every member of your family during the holidays, just as a gift.
No, you get it. It's
seriously.
like, what do I get this person? Like,
Really?
This is something that's going to show like you care. It's unique, and it's going to be, and provide that peace of mind. And just, it's a next level gift.
Well, and I'm just going to toss this out to all of my female listeners, and you may never have had a UTI, but most women my age have.
Yep.
I can tell you right now, there's not much worse medically that I can think of than having a UTI and you can't treat it. You can go into retention, which has happened to me twice, and it's horrible. And it can lead to sepsis, because I actually know someone who died of sepsis that started with a UTI that was left untreated. So this is no small matter. It's not even, to me, a luxury what you're offering. I mean, I have Patriot Supply. I try to be as prepared. I mean, in fact, we just checked our boxes to make sure we're still good, because when it happens, there's no, racing to get things, because everyone's in the same boat, as you have said. If the supply chain is interrupted, what you have is what you have.
Yeah.
And wow.
You're bringing up the food storage, right? Like, absolutely, you got to have your food storage. And my argument here is the likelihood of needing to actually use your food storage is way less than the likelihood of you getting a UTI, feeling like it's coming on, being on a trip somewhere, or being in a natural disaster, or whatever it is. That's going to happen, and it has happened. So I think you're right. It's not a luxury. It's a necessity.
So I will have all of the information as to how people can find out about the organization, how they can buy the kits, and the discount code will be on there. And I applaud you, and I thank you for what you're doing, and I will help spread the word. And everyone watching and listening, I hope you will as well. This is something that, the fact that you came up with this, you're very forward thinking, and I appreciate it. Well,
thank you. It only works because of people like you who help us spread the word. So I appreciate that.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Rowland. I so appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thanks again.